Tonight, the G7 report card, what world leaders actually achieved as the summit concludes. What Canadian officials are saying privately and what the Prime Minister is saying publicly about why the Americans didn't sign a joint statement on Ukraine.
The language that's in my declaration, directly with President Trump, no adjustments.
Canada's new multi-billion-dollar commitment and a thaw in the diplomatic chill with India. Trump's uncompromising demand to Iran as the U.S. considers military involvement. The soaring tensions as Canadians caught in the crosshairs share their fears. Plus, the criminal sequence that led her DNA to the dark web.
If that information is compromised, it's kind of scary.
Can Edmonton stay alive and take a step closer to the Stanley Cup?
The Oilers' desperation.
And the homegrown sense of style.
Right where I live, there's this amazing material.
Furnishing the high-stakes meeting in the mountains.
CTV National News with Omar Sajadina, reporting tonight from Banff, Alberta.
Good evening. The idyllic backdrop of the Canadian Rockies, where global leaders have now ended 2 days of critical meetings, is a sharp contrast to the major geopolitical and economic tensions simmering around the world. At least 10 people were killed and dozens injured after Russia carried out one of its deadliest attacks ever on Kyiv. And there are explosions over Tel Aviv tonight as Iran launches a new wave of missiles and Israel has carried out fresh strikes in Tehran. Late this evening, Prime Minister Mark Carney gave his closing remarks, reiterating calls for de-escalation in the Middle East and billions more in support for Ukraine. And inside that room in Kananaskis was CTV senior political correspondent Mike LeCouture. Mike, on the issue of Ukraine, there seems to be a gap between what the Prime Minister told reporters this evening about why the U.S. didn't sign on to the joint statement and what you are hearing. Walk us through that.
Yeah, it's interesting, Omar, because earlier in the day, a senior government source told us that there wasn't going to be that joint statement on Ukraine because the U.S. wanted to water down the language. Now, we were being told that it's because they didn't want to ruin their negotiations with Russia. As a result, it made it into the chair statement, which is something that is given by the host country of the G7. Now, we asked afterwards in his press conference of Prime Minister Mark Carney, and he was trying to quash any idea that U.S. President Donald Trump was trying to weaken that statement. In fact, he said that no other leaders had any input into that statement to try and make it any lesser than it is already. Have a listen.
There would be, if you want a nuance or if you want a sense, there would be things that some of us, Canada included, would say above and beyond what was said in the chair's summary. But the recognition of the importance of the initiative of President Trump to achieve a lasting peace, absolutely agreed. That we are resolute in pursuing all options to maximize pressure on Russia, including financial sanctions, agreed. That we recognize that Ukraine alone has committed to an unconditional ceasefire, agreed. And that we all agreed that Russia must do the same.
Now, on the meeting with the Indian Prime Minister, there's been, as we know, a diplomatic chill. The invitation has been controversial. What did the Prime Minister tell you about what the two leaders talked about in their meeting and about the state of the relationship?
Yeah, they're going one step further, Omar, really trying to repair that relationship. Both of the leaders agreed to reappoint high commissioners in each other's countries. Now, we know that those relations went frosty as a result of those RCMP allegations, that there were elements of the Modi government that were involved in homicides and extortions in this country. That is something that obviously India has denied in the past. And the Prime Minister was asked specifically about whether or not he brought up to Prime Minister Modi that killing of Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Here is what he had to say.
We have had a discussion, the Prime Minister and I, about the importance of having the law enforcement to law enforcement dialogue, which is not just dialogue, cooperation directly. The importance of addressing transnational repression, as I noted, including when we met, and Obviously, there is a judicial process that's underway, and I need to be careful about further commentary.
Omar, I asked him yes or no. Did he bring up the murder? And the Prime Minister referred back to his previous answer. Omar?
All right, Michael Couture in Kananaskis tonight. Mike, thank you. Let's talk more about what the leaders actually achieved. The joint statement on the Middle East was broad and ultimately no joint statement on Ukraine, two major global hotspots right now. Let's bring in CTV's chief political correspondent, Vashi Capello. So, Vashi, what are we to make of it all?
Hi, Omar. Well, the takeaway seems more bilateral more than anything else. Kind of Canada-U.S. trade relationship, Canada-India trade relationship. But more widely, the takeaway appears to be, even with Donald Trump leaving, consensus was difficult to arrive at. Take the issue of Ukraine, for example. Expectations heading into the G7 were that there could be a statement that all parties, excluding the U.S., could arrive at that could show additional support for Ukraine, feeling, pretty vulnerable at this moment in time, given what Russia did last night. That didn't end up being the case, and there are certainly a number of reasons being put forth by the federal government, by other governments, but ultimately, though Canada ponied up more money, again, that was on a bilateral basis. Overall, consensus appears to have been very difficult to reach on a host of other issues, and that's my takeaway. Omar?
All right, Vashi, thank you. G7 leaders did agree to a de-escalation of hostilities in the Middle East, even as the U.S. president today ratcheted up his warnings to Iran, calling for an unconditional surrender and appearing to consider American military involvement. CTV's Washington bureau chief Joy Malbin on a major decision for Washington. Joy.
Omar, the U.S. president has a critical decision to make. Does he help Israel, an ally, and order a U.S. strike against Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities buried deep underground that only America's so-called bunker-busting bombs can reach? Now, Trump met with his national security team this afternoon and is reportedly seriously considering it, posting on Truth Social that, quote, "We now have complete and total control of the skies over Iran," and threatening Iran's supreme leader, saying he knows where he's hiding, but, quote, "We are not going to take him out, at least for now." The president, who promised to be a peacemaker, but his patience is wearing thin. Here's what he said on Air Force One.
I told him to do the deal. They should have done the deal. The cities have been blown to pieces, have lost a lot of people. They should have done the deal. I told them, do the deal. So I'm not too much in the mood to negotiate.
The Pentagon is already moving warplanes and an aircraft carrier to the Middle East, and Vice President J.D. Vance put out a statement saying the president may, quote, need to take further action to end Iran's nuclear enrichment, putting Americans on notice. Donald Trump promised supporters no more U.S. involvement in foreign wars, and Republicans on Capitol Hill are deeply divided.
I trust the president on this.
And I'm hoping the president will not get involved in the war. This is not our war. This is Iran's war.
Don't panic, and hope we all make the right decision when it comes down to it.
And tonight, the president is demanding Iran's unconditional surrender as he weighs his options, push for negotiations, or join Israel's war and bomb Iran. Omar?
All right, Joy Malbin in Washington tonight. As we mentioned, Israel and Iran continue to trade strikes as the conflict becomes increasingly precarious and deadly. Among the millions on edge are Canadians from both countries. CTV's Adrian Gobriel spoke to some of them today.
Israel's missile defense system shoots high into the dark sky in the early Wednesday morning hours as explosions echo across Tel Aviv. With this latest war in the Middle East now entering its sixth deadly day, earlier this F-15 Eagle fighter jet is filmed taking off for Iran, strapped with warheads. As a young child surveys this gaping crater from an airstrike on Tuesday north of Tel Aviv, Israeli Canadians like Raphael Posh, a father of two who's worked as a paramedic across the world, believes Iran's military response feels far more precarious than what he and his family have grown accustomed to in recent years.
If one of those missiles hit, it takes down a city block, as opposed to one of the missiles from Hamas would hit. It takes out an apartment, a room, a hole in a building, depending on the size of the rocket. So there's definitely a lot more of a worry, and there's a lot more of a feeling of urgency.
Hamilton, Ontario doctor Panid Borhanju took this video following an Israeli airstrike on a building down the street from his family's apartment in Tehran.
It's terrifying, and I was only probably 700 meters away from the blast site.
Orhanjo is one of the fortunate few who've been able to safely cross into Turkey at a land border, forced to leave his extended family behind. He took this video of his last moments in Iran, as the flash of rockets could still be seen in the sky.
And then I had to sort of leave and say goodbye to them in Tehran, which was very emotional. Especially my mom, because she hugged me and said, "If this is the last time I see you, it's possible." But as sad as it is for me to say.
As of today, at least 224 people have been killed in Iran, 24 in Israel, since the fighting began late last week.
On his own social media site, President Donald Trump posted that the U.S. knows exactly where Iran's supreme leader is hiding, calling him an easy target, though vowing not to kill him, saying, quote, "At least not yet." Omar.
All right, Adrian, thank you. Back here at home and in Alberta, Conservative Damien Keurig has resigned his seat in the riding of Battle River Crowfoot so Pierre Poilievre can run in a by-election. Poilievre has been without a seat after failing to win the Ottawa area riding he represented for 20 years. The Prime Minister has said he will call a by-election as soon as possible. Well, the Edmonton Oilers fell short in a must-win Game 6 against the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup final.
Now across from Ekholm to Bouchard. Reinhardt with the steal, nice move, goes to the net, scores! Panther perfection! The Florida Panthers win their second consecutive Stanley Cup!
The Panthers cruised to a 5-1 victory, beating the Oilers for a second straight year in the Cup final. The Oilers' loss means Canada's Cup drought is now at 32 years and counting. Multiple lawsuits have been launched against 23andMe, the genetic testing company hit by a massive hacker breach in 2023. Now, a joint investigation by Canada and the UK has concluded the company failed to protect millions of customers, including hundreds of thousands of Canadians. CTV's Abigail Beeman now on the data compromised and the cautionary tale.
Calling herself a sperm donor kid, 23andMe helped Rachel Curry find 6 half-siblings and her biological father.
It was kind of like putting all the puzzle pieces together with just like a test online.
But she's concerned by new findings from British and Canadian privacy commissioners who report the genetic testing giant didn't properly protect customer data or have safeguards in place.
If that information is compromised, it's kind of scary.
Unlike usernames, passwords, and email addresses, you can't change your genetic makeup when a data breach occurs.
In 2023, a hacker carried out what's called a credential stuffing attack, using stolen login info to gain access to health, race, ethnicity information, and more, mostly derived from the user's DNA.
That can be used to craft some very customized messages to us. And anyone who's been caught up in this really needs to have their heads on a swivel, eyes wide open, because they're being targeted now and well into the future.
The UK Privacy Commissioner levied a fine equivalent to 4.2 million Canadian dollars. His Canadian counterpart doesn't have the same power.
I will continue to use all the tools that I have, but I need more and better ones.
23andMe declared bankruptcy in March and is in the process of being bought by TTAM Research Institute, led by its former CEO. In a statement to CTV News, a spokesperson said by the end of 2024, 23andMe had implemented multiple steps to increase security, and as part of the deal, TTAM Research Institute made several binding commitments to enhance protections for customer data and privacy.
The privacy commissioners say they expect the new owners to stick to those commitments, and they'll be watching closely.
All right, Abigail, thank you. The mother of a 3-year-old missing in Montreal has been arrested and charged with child abandonment. Hours before the toddler disappeared, a video posted on her mother's TikTok showed her holding the girl.
You try that again, and this is gonna get ugly.
The caption on the video saying, "I know more than you think." Police say Claire Bell was last seen on Sunday morning near her home and was reported missing by her mother hours later in a city west of Montreal. Police have found a dead Chihuahua that matches the description of the child's dog and located the mother's car, a gray Ford Escape with a baby on board sign.
You want to hear about stupid criminals? Have you ever seen that show about stupid criminals out there? So 4 thugs come racing down my street, masks on, ready to take the car out of the driveway.
Ontario's premier says he was asleep when suspected car thieves approached his Toronto home. Police foiled the attempt and arrested 4 people. Allegedly discovered in the vehicle a programmable master key and device to pull off the theft. Coming up.
I started doing more homework and seeing how deep this problem really went.
The shady scheme that drove this dealership out of business. An Ontario car dealer stripped of his business is doing his own investigation after he believes he and his company were taken for a ride by fraudsters who infiltrated his business. W5's John Woodward digs into how a dealership ended up selling stolen cars.
Running a car dealership was Chris Olszewski's childhood dream.
It was my purpose as a young boy. I always wanted to be a car dealer.
He achieved that dream, but his business faced major challenges when COVID-19 hit.
All dealers were put in survival mode.
Olszewski said he bought cars anywhere he could just to keep the lights on and his staff employed. But some of those cars were not what they seemed. One of his customers complained their insurance company wouldn't cover this Porsche Cayenne because it had a fake vehicle identification number, or VIN, a sign that it could be a stolen car. Olszewski at first didn't believe it. Then he started to dig.
I started doing more homework and seeing how deep this problem really went.
Olszewski opened his records to W5.
So these are the suspicious ones right here?
Yeah, these are the suspicious ones.
23 cars that were potentially stolen with suspect vehicle identification numbers, together worth more than $2.3 million. And Olszewski says police told him something even stranger about one customer.
Yeah, he's passed away. He's not even alive. We delivered a car to a guy that was not alive.
How is that possible?
Great question.
We tried to reach many of these buyers, many numbers not connected. One's listed contact information was noemail@noemail.com. Their employers had never heard of them.
That never happened. I will confirm 100,000,000%.
Two salespeople, Fatty Zito and Harris Bachneck, were arrested by the Toronto police, who accused them of masterminding a fraud scheme to sell stolen cars.
The dealership's own funds were then used to buy the vehicles, which were fraudulently presented as legitimate to unsuspecting buyers.
One company that was listed as selling 6 to the dealership was WikiCar, listed as a salesperson, the same Fatty Zito. We checked out the listed address east of Toronto. There are car companies at that address, but people who worked for those companies told us WikiCar is long gone.
I moved here 3 years ago. It was no more here.
We reached each of them over the phone. Bachneck and Zito's lawyer said the issues in the paperwork were just mistakes, and they never meant to sell any stolen cars. The salespeople's contention is that they were duped too. So we looked into that, obtaining from multiple sources the Carfax reports the pair are charged with altering, and took them to Carfax itself, which still has them on record. The company says they're identical, not altered, as the police allege. Here's Harris Bachneck.
Had I thought an inkling, just a second, just some weird idea that something was involving stolen vehicles, I'd have never got involved with it. I would have left it. That's not who I am. I was raised better than that.
All this raises a lot of questions about what will happen in this prosecution. Nothing has been proven in court.
How has this all affected you?
It's crippled me. I've lost everything I've ever worked for.
His company is now on the ropes. After the alleged fraud came to light, it couldn't pay back bank loans and taxes and is now in receivership.
You know, I couldn't have been more proud of that company. It was my first store.
Olszewski is apologizing to his staff, his customers, and his family for having this happen on his watch. One customer whose family member bought a stolen car says police told him there were even more people involved.
According to the investigations, there's connection with Service Ontario members.
Service Ontario, the agency that registers cars on behalf of the Ontario government.
And tomorrow, John will tell us about the Service Ontario employees arrested. Still ahead, remembering the life of a star chef. A historic landmark that sat on the shore of Vancouver Island for more than a century has been scorched in a fire. This charred skeleton is what remains of a 128-year-old shipwreck after a fire on the beach earlier this month. The photographer behind this video says it looks more corpse-like now than it was before. The artifact suffered significant damage from the fire, but is still intact. The Canadian Grand Prix is staying on the Formula One circuit and in Montreal for at least 10 more years. Montreal Mayor Valérie Plante called it fantastic news. Grand Prix weekend is a major economic boost with more than 350,000 spectators attending this past weekend's event. A beloved chef on the Food Network, Anne Burrell, has died. The star was known as much for her platinum blonde hair and signature wit, as well as her fierce skills in the kitchen. She was a fan favorite and host of the hit show Worst Cooks in America. No cause of death was provided. Anne Burrell was 55. Still ahead, a designer's purpose behind symbolic furniture pieces at the G7 summit. World leaders here weren't just surrounded by beautiful scenery, but with furniture that reflected elements of Canada. CTV's Kelly Gregg explains.
From concept to creation, Tom Fugger's designs are centered around Canadian materials.
Like a rubbed gray Tyndall stone, you can kind of see the patterning that appears within the stone itself.
This is Tyndall stone, and it's the inspiration for his latest work.
So it is very much like a Canadian stone, but it's exclusively quarried in Manitoba.
Tyndall stone is featured on the cladding of provincial legislatures, the Winnipeg Art Gallery, and in Ottawa's Centre Block. It's the only Canadian entry that has been designated a global heritage stone.
And then this is an example of some fossils that are typically found within the stone as well.
Fugger is one of the few Canadian designers using it in furniture. Now he's created 3 pieces from his Montreal studio that were commissioned by the G7, including one piece inside the leader's lounge.
This side table also acts as a vase, and it features an arrangement of Saskatoon berry flowers.
Particularly fitting because Fugger was born in Saskatchewan. Leading up to the G7, he went to Alberta to help set up the pieces. Each of these side tables weighs 1,400 pounds. While the G7 has shown off the Canadian Rockies, for Fugger, it's an opportunity to highlight the beauty of a different kind of rock.
I think as Canadians, we kind of think that, exotic materials and interesting, things are always elsewhere. And I started to really kind of look inward, like right at home, right where I live, there's this amazing material that I think should be considered exotic to the rest of the world.
Fugger's work now also on the world stage, mixing style with a uniquely Canadian substance. Kelly Gregg, CTV News, Montreal.
And that's a snapshot of this Tuesday. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Good night and see you tomorrow.